Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alberta Freemason podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Right Worshipful Brother Tobias Terrill. Today's episode is going to be all about Robbie Burns. It happens to be Robbie Burns' birthday.
266th, by the way.
266 and looking good. We've got a number of guests and, of course, our regulars on the podcast.
Hi, I'm Preston, chaplain and past master of Acacia Lodge number 11 in Edmonton, and the editor of the Alberta Freemason.
Hi, I'm John Hayes. I'm Worshipful Master of Highlands Unity Lodge 168 in Edmonton and past Sovereign Grand Master of the Allied Masonic Degrees of Canada.
I'm Tom Campbell, past Master of Commercial 81 in Edmonton.
I'm Angus Campbell. I'm a member of Fort McMurray Lodge 195 and a past master of Lodge Anderson Macmillan 1552 in Glasgow, Scotland.
So it's easy enough to Google the life of Robbie Burns. Usually we talk about how he's a great poet and then he had a hard life and he died young. But he's got a really good way of connecting to the fraternity and all of the passions of humanity, really. And so he's become a really great figure, not just for Scottish culture, but for Freemasonry around the world.
I recall a story I learned in Scotland while a lodge called Robert Burns Initiated was waiting to be chartered under the Scottish Constitution. He was initiated in the year 1781. That's the number they wanted. They waited 5 years to petition for charter. And that year there were two other requests, so it wasn't guaranteed they'd get it. However, they did. So there is one lodge in Scotland which is titled Lodge Robert Burns Initiated, and it's numbered 1781.
In preparation for this, I did what every great person does. I went to the old Google and pulled up a bunch of stuff, and I see a lot of interesting facts and things you should know about the great Robbie Burns. But where do we start?
Why don't you start with the number of countries that he's well known in and the number of languages his work has been translated into?
Okay, sure.
You haven't looked that up?
No, I have not. Go ahead, Tom. What are some details?
Well, in terms of works, I don't know how many he actually wrote because he collected a few from his mother's handmaidens and friends, most of which he wrote himself, but a lot, particularly the one I know best, he did not write, is Auld Lang Syne. He learned that one. But from the stuff that he did write, and you have to read it for yourself, one really needs a good understanding of Lowland Scots or Lowland Scottish to understand what he's meaning. But there are a number of good compendiums out there that will give you an English translation. There is a great insight from the man who was only 37 years old when he passed away into the human condition. He would look at something and see things that you and I would pass by without a second thought. Really, really deep thinker who really appreciated a lot of things in his life, not the least of which is the fairer gender, and the fact that he's got 8 children from 4 wives. His epistles are quite interesting, and very few people refer to them.
I think one of the reasons that we appreciate Robbie Burns is that he brings to a level that Freemasons can access poetry and the eye of a poet. As Tom said, he noticed things that other people just walk right by, like a mouse in a field, or a thistle and the down on a thistle, or the sky. He also saw the things that we all see as well, sunsets and beautiful women and things like that. But at the end of the day, he manages to make what tends to be kind of an ethereal way of seeing the world, the poet, and an inaccessible one, because poetry is hard to read. At least a lot of poetry is hard to read. If you ever don't believe that, try Ezra Pound for 5 minutes. But if you go into Robbie Burns, it's relatively easy to read. It's relatively clear. And he took that vision and he made it available to us, the common man. In a lot of ways, his gift is not being the greatest poet ever or the greatest writer or any of those other things. It's a matter of tying this beauty and this vision to something that you can celebrate over haggis and roast beef in a group of 200 people. That's not something most poetry does.
The sign of a great artist is when they can pull somebody in, draw them in, and immerse them in what it is. And so you look at some of Robbie's works, the Mouse is Ode to the Mouse is a good example because you get the sense of being immersed right into the story and drawn in for the story. And that's just a fantastic job.
And he ties it into more philosophical concepts too. So when you're reading it, it isn't just all about the mouse or any of this. He brings in what all great artists try to do too, and that is a criticism or a discussion on society and mores. So a lot of Robbie Burns was criticizing the rich, celebrating the honest and earthy, if that's the right word, the grounded human beings who live day to day in Scotland. A lot of what we see now isn't that. We see movie stars and people like that, and they don't celebrate that. They celebrate the lives of the rich and famous, which they make up anyway. And Robbie Burns flipped it the other way and celebrated the lives of the poor and infamous and did a nice job of that. And by doing that, he introduces philosophical concepts, the commonality of mankind working together to gain things, the essential integrity and intelligence and hard work of the common human being living in Scotland.
Yeah, and I saw somewhere too that he was actually in favor of the Renaissance and some of that was happening in France in and around that time, I believe.
He almost certainly was. He was almost certainly a socialist. Avant the word, right? I mean, the socialism was created in the 19th century. He would have been right on board with many of the movements that saw for the emancipation of women, the emancipation of the worker, and the sharing of that which we have with each other.
That should not be a surprise to anyone. I mean, the Industrial Revolution began the year after he was born. It went on for well after his death. But during his lifetime, you had the French Revolution, you had the American Revolution, you had a lot of things happening that took time to move around the world. Sure. To go back a little bit, though, and emphasize what John was saying about Burns not despising, but his lack of respect for the upper classes and their airs and graces. One of the things that he wrote that's always stuck in my mind and always will, as he laid it down, it's, oh God, the gift he gave us to see ourselves as others see us. And in English, that's for God to allow us to see what we are for ourselves compared to other people. He really, really respected honesty and genuineness in people and had absolutely no time whatsoever for false airs and graces and turning your nose up at folk. He did not like that at all. Nor do most of us Scots.
I was speaking last year in Lac-la-Biche. They have a burn supper in Lac-la-Biche in March. You're speaking to a lot of folks that, well, they don't really know Robert Burns. You know, why are we here? I got a help from a quote that I researched, and I thought it encapsulated what we think about Robert Burns and why we admire him so much. Or he could say what we would like to say, and in a way that we would like to see it. Oh, talking about Scotland selling itself out, we were bought and sold for English gold, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. And he was talking about the Scottish lords, not about the English lords. That underlines for me, or it did for me anyway. Yeah.
The fact that it's about 60 years after the Act of Union when Scotland and England united under James, he was well aware that we were sold out in order for that union to occur.
Yes.
Also, there was a number of barons who did make money from the union by bringing tobacco over from the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that was more recent than World War II is to us. And so, I mean, putting that into context, he would have met men when he was young who fought and probably on both sides of that, but not mostly on the side of the Unionists. You know, the things he wrote about women, would most of us say them? But we might want to at some point in our lives, but we wouldn't likely say them. But you could hand over a Robbie Burns poem and say, "Here, honey, this is kind of what I think of you," and then that would solve part of the issue because they give voice to that which we want to and can't, or we do it in a prosaic way that is kind of humdrum, and they raise it up.
We talked earlier about his poem To a Mouse, when he just turned up its nest as winter was approaching. Does anyone know or remember his other one, To a Louse, that was written when he sat in church on a Sunday, and the lady in front of him, they were standing up singing their hymn, and he saw a louse crawling up her dress. And his commentary on how that really shouldn't happen. The louse shouldn't be there, but it's reality. And how he goes on. It's worth the read.
I believe he was talking about her, that she thought she looked just wonderful. He was there in her Sunday best, and she thought she looked just wonderful. And she did not realise that this louse was climbing up there and spoiling the whole presentation. And that's why he said, well, with some further gift to give us.
So as far as Robbie Burns goes, and the Robbie Burns celebrations that go on, I enjoy them because it's not just about Robbie Burns. Well, he's probably the most famous Scotsman, one could argue. He was the first real person to appear on a Coca-Cola bottle. Robbie Burns suppers and this idea of the Robbie Burns supper, it's a celebration of Scotland. It's about the overall heritage. It's about everything that is Scottish, from the bagpipe to the food to the music, the dancers. And I think the most successful Robbie Burns suppers encapsulate all of that.
If he had never become a Mason, he would never have achieved the fame that he has, simply because the Kilmarnock edition, or the first of his published works, was entirely paid for by brethren. And if that support had not been there, he would probably have died in obscurity.
As most poets do, die in obscurity. Scotland is an interesting country, but was perhaps somewhat more interesting at the time in that it was an intellectual powerhouse in many ways and punched way above its weight in population. You look at the effect that this relatively small, relatively poor country has on the world, and look at a country like, I don't know, a country with 20 times as many people for the last 400 years, and they've had nowhere near the impact. It helped being next to England. If it weren't for the English, if Scotland had been happily able to just live quietly in its lowland valley there and the highlands behind it without being driven out by the English, there might not be nearly as many Scots in Nova Scotia and other places. It's an interesting country, though, and we see more of it because of Robbie Burns. Without Robbie Burns, we wouldn't see Highland dancing coming outside of the Scottish societies.
Here's the thing about addressing the Haggis. That's one of my things, addressing the Haggis. Burns, I think, done it tongue-in-cheek. How else would he have done it? Because let's face it, you're talking to a sausage.
He certainly wasn't extolling its culinary excellence, that's for sure.
Oh. Yeah.
But he was remarking upon how many a Scots family had to survive on that type of fare.
Yes. Yeah. It was a poor person's food, and like an awful lot of other poor person's foods, it's become considered in some places a delicacy.
Absolutely. In those days, you couldn't afford in Scotland to throw away anything that was edible.
No.
And if there were parts of the beast that weren't really edible, you tried to find a way to make them edible. Yes. And that's how haggis came about, I believe.
Keep it up real fine, mix it with the meat, and hope for the best.
Add some spices to make it as flavorful as you can stomach, and throw it in a stomach.
It's always good as long as there's gravy with it.
He pretty plainly had a sense of humor and didn't take himself too seriously. I think probably the biggest problem we had with the rich and the upper classes, they took themselves so bloody seriously all the time.
Do we know much about Robbie Burns' Masonic career and what kind of work he'd done? Did he ever obtain a worshipful master or anything like that? Anyone know?
From the research I have done, he never became a worshipful master. In Scotland, it's a right worshipful master. He did serve in Lodge as depute master, which is an office under the Scottish Constitution, as his substitute master. He belonged to 3 separate lodges from time to time.
Not only was a Mason, deputy master, but he was a very active Mason.
The poet laureate of the Grand Lodge of Scotland while he was in Edinburgh.
Well, he rose very quickly. You said he was initiated in 1781, right, Tom?
Yes.
And he served as depute master in 1784, and he served as depute master for 4 years.
He was quite influenced by revolutionary writing, which was all over the place, as you said, the French Revolution, the American Revolution.
Yep.
And those were all intellectual revolutions. They started by writers writing tracts and fiction as well that exposed all the rotting pilings holding up society, and people were in there going, let's cut some of those down after they read these things, and Burns would have read a lot of that.
Take your time, read his work, read it again, and read it again, and think about what he's trying to communicate to you, because it's like everything else in life. It's not just what's written there. It's the meaning behind it.
If anyone has never been to a Burns supper, go and enjoy it. It's a fun, relaxed night. I was at one Burns supper, and you never know sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. And this was in Lloydminster. And Bill, I can't remember his second name. He's not with us anymore. He got up to do the Immortal memory. And I said, okay, now Bill will tell us about Robert Burns. He says, Robert Burns was born on the 25th of January, 1759, and he died on the 21st of July, 1796, and sat down. That was his Immortal memory.
Robbie was just a fascinating individual. I don't think that generations to come will ever come close to understanding the just what he meant from the true works. I think it can be interpreted again, much to what Tom said. I think that there'll be a lasting legacy for many, many years to come, and many future generations can enjoy his works. And that's what makes those individuals great and timeless. So I'm just grateful to be part of a fraternity that recognizes his worth and gave him the opportunity, and then has continued to grow that opportunity by keeping his legacy alive all these many years.
As much as it's flavored like a Scottish celebration when we go to these Burns suppers, everything that Burns did is part of a universal human experience, that it's so easy to relate to, that it is for everybody. And that's, I feel like, what we're supposed to be doing with the craft as well.
If there's a poet he's like that isn't a Scots poet, it would be Tennyson. And Tennyson saw the world much the same way. He was able to reach the common people in much the same way, and he encapsulated the feeling of the place that he lived in much the same way. But poets do that. Great poets do that. So the commentary that Tom left with, read it again, and think about it. What he's saying is not just what he's saying, but what's behind the words. That's a really good method for reading any poem.
We want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Alberta Freemason podcast. As we go out, we'd like to thank Tom Campbell, Angus Campbell, and of course John Hayes and Preston Meyer for being part of this. We'd like to thank Lardeon Ranon for his work as the Grand Organist. Thank you, and please go out and read a poem or two on Robbie Burns.
Happy to meet, sorry to part, happy to meet again.
Fair fa, your sonsy face, great chieftain of the puddin' race, a boonama, ye attack your place, H, Tripe, or Terrill. Weel are ye worthy of grace, as lang as my earl. The groaning trencher, there ye fall. Your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pin would help to mend a mill in time of need, while through your pores the dews distill like amber bead.
His knife, see rustic labour dicht, and cut you up with any split, trenching your gushing entrails bricht, like honey dish.
And then, oh, what a glorious sight! Warm, reeking, and rich. Then, horn for horn they stretch and strive. He'll take the hindmost, on they drive, till all their wheel-swole kites below are bent like drums.
Then all good man may's like to ride. We think it hums. Is there that oor his French ragout, or olio that would stow a sou, or fricassee with mackerel spew, with perfect scunner, looks down with sneer and scorn for view, on sick a dinner.
Poor devil, see him over his trash, as feckless as a withered ash, his spindled shank a good whip lash, his knee even knit, through bloody flood or field to dash. Oh, how unfit!
But mark the rustic, Haggis fed. The trembling earth resounds his tread. Clap in his lully neva blade, he'll mark it whistle. It lags and ears and heat will stay, like taps will bristle.
Ye powers that make mankind their care, dish them out, their billow fair. Old Scotland wants nae skinking ware that dupes and luggies. But if ye wish her grateful prayer, gie her a haggis.